All right.
Hey, welcome back.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. This just in.
And it's Graham.
All right. We are finishing up our political cult series today. It's been a wild fucking ride, that's for sure. I was gonna say strong. I was like pretty fucked up. Like probably the most fucked up that we've talked about so far. I mean,
It might,
honestly,
it's probably gonna go down as like one of the worst that we talk about, I would imagine. Well, I don't know. There's a lot of sticky stuff on the horizon.
man, that list is long. You guys are not gonna get rid of us for like fucking years.
Yeah, basically we're
That
just gonna
list,
do
how
this
many pages is it?
for the rest of our lives. I think when we broke apart different cults, there's over 140, I think, that we listed. Gangs is
Yeah,
still being worked on, and there's however many of that. I mean,
this
so
is
many.
not even including the other master list that we took all the cults from. So
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
huge. It's
Exactly.
gonna be
It
a
is
lot.
huge.
It's gonna be fun.
Why? I know we're gonna be
We're never
circling
gonna
back
stop.
books quite
We're gonna be
often.
doing this when they're 60 years old, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
However, I'm banking on this for retirement.
Yeah. All right, cool. So I'll start off with the trigger warning.
Oh, do you want to tell them what it's about though? We still haven't let them know.
Oh my God, yeah, I guess so, right? So yeah, today we're talking about something really heavy. The story of a movement that began as a ragged band of Islamic religious students, also known as madrasas, local militiamen, and through war, patronage, extreme ideology, became the rulers of a nation. And that movement calls itself the Taliban.
Yeah.
Yeah, to some, it's a liberation force that ended chaos. To many more, it's a repressive theocracy that erased women from public life. Violent transnational extremists use Afghan soil as their base. We're going to trace that arc from the country's collapse after 1973 coup through the Soviet invasion, civil war, the Taliban's first rise in the 1990s, the arrival of Al Qaeda, and then their return to power in 2021. Ask a hard question. Can a political movement like the Taliban also be described in method, if not name, like a political cult? So that is the
That's a big
welcome.
question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So for the trigger warning, there's like
It's gonna be
everything,
everything. Yeah.
literally just everything. Okay.
Yeah.
War, violence, armed conflict, executions, bombings, terrorism, extreme ideology, human rights abuses. I'm talking fucking tons of
Yeah.
human rights abuse, description of repression, punishment, torture, gender-based violence, oppression, religious extremism, indoctrination, yeah, death, loss, trauma, cultural destruction, political manipulation, propaganda, discussion of cult-like psychological control within authoritarian systems. So I feel like that's barely touching
Yeah,
everything, really.
I have persecution of women and minorities, violence
Yes.
against religious and ethnic groups, targeted killings and mass casualties, torture, suicide, false imprisonment, homophobia, transphobia, and genocide. So, I mean,
Yeah.
and that's probably not even a quarter of the atrocities,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty horrific. This was a really heavy research.
Yeah.
I It's gonna sound kind of sick, but I really enjoyed the research for this one. I just was, yeah, I was going in blind, really grew up in a very, tumultuous time involving the Taliban and the, bombing 9/11 and stuff like that. So
Yeah, it's a
kind
part of
of,
our generation's war, really.
yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
Afghanistan, Iraq, and the conflict over there is really like our generation's wartime. For 20 years of our lives, it's been going on. Um, but I didn't know enough. I didn't know anything. I mean, now
Yeah,
that I know,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, absolutely.
Every
What's up?
time we do our research, I feel like a total dunce.
Yeah, Yeah, I really enjoyed this one, but it especially the history of, the country and how this happened and stuff like
Yeah.
that. That whole part was really juicy. So I'm very excited to get into it. So I'm gonna start off with Afghanistan timeline, the pre-Taliban, 1973 to 1994.
Before you
What's up?
do that, can I recap our cult definition?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I didn't even write that one in.
Okay. So just to recap real quickly, the definition of a political cult off the top, idolizing a charismatic figure or ideal. In our case, it would be Mullah Omar or the Islamic fundamentalism. The
Mhm.
inability to criticize or question the leader or their practices, and strict enforcement and severe punishment of defectors in the Taliban. And there's
Oh,
a high demand on the followers to adhere to all rules that the Taliban put in place. And there's also a threat of violence for members or members' families to abide. There's isolation and control of the followers and or information about the cult itself. The definition of a political cult, a recap, it is idolizing a charismatic figure or ideal. In our case today, it's Mullah Omar and Islamic fundamentalism. It's the inability to criticize or question the leader or their policies. Now, as far as the Taliban goes, there's strict enforcement and severe punishment of defectors, a high demand on the followers to adhere. And then another point for our political cult definition is threat of violence for members or members' families to abide, which obviously we know that there's a high level of violence within the Taliban if you leave or try to do. And then isolation and control of the followers and or information about the cult itself. And yeah, all information and movement in or out of the borders, if any, is controlled by the Taliban. Information and human bodies don't move without the Taliban having some say so or some surveillance of that movement or information. So it's complete control as far as I've come to learn. Yeah. And that's it. That's kind of the three big marks is the charismatic leader or ideology, and then the
mhm.
isolation and then control, coercion, and yeah, hits all of them, unfortunately. So, and
Yeah,
in really
absolutely.
extreme ways, like in really extreme ways.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm kind of wondering about is how much this one kind of fits into religious cult as well as political cult.
Yeah,
Obviously, it's a political party, but it is really controlled by religious extremism. And then there's even more extreme versions from this already extreme, like,
Al Qaeda.
so
Yeah,
yeah. So that's something I didn't really think of until just now, but
it's true. Yeah,
yeah, diving into the pre-Taliban history. So what I have here is Muhammad Khan overthrows the monarchy, ending the Afghan monarchy and starting a republic. And this was in 1973. This destabilized decades of governance that realigned political factions. Once in power, however, Dowd, I hope I'm saying his name right, Dowd turned his back on the leftists who had previously been his allies. And in 1978, Dowd was toppled by a coup in the leftist People Democratic Party of Afghanistan. And the new president and prime minister that took over the coup, they were eager to establish modern laws. And I bet you can imagine how well that went over. So that clashed with the tradition, keeping majority of the country, even though they were warned by the Soviets, it would not go over well. So they wanted to implement land reform, allow women to deny their hijab and gain an education. And like I said, did not go over well. So
mm-mm.
they knew that. So in April of 1978, there was a SAR revolution, and that is SAUR, probably butchering that. So
Good.
brought by a pro-Soviet government. which faced widespread insurgency. So the USSR invaded in December of 1979. Decade of war destroyed state institutions, eradicated militias and foreign fighters inside Afghanistan. The fundamentalists declared jihad, and jihad is known as holy war. So anyone fighting for the cause of um, their religion, and they declared jihad to overthrow the new president and prime minister. The soldiers were known as mujahideen, soldiers of God, and the United States saw an opportunity to access Afghan oil, of course, right? And by sending aid to the mujahideen. So the Soviets were involved more politically than militarily, but their presence was not appreciated at all. And the 50 Soviet diplomats were murdered in a rebel attack in Herat.
And
This
that's in
was,
the 50s?
what's up?
Did you say that was in the 50s?
This was in the 70s, 1978. There
I
was,
thought what was the last line you just said?
there was 50 Soviet diplomats were murdered in a rebel attack in Herat.
50. Okay, that's where I got the 50 from. Okay.
Yeah, so there was, I mean, it was a massacre. It really was because I mean, there were so many people that were pissed off that the Soviet Union was there, and
Yeah.
I would be too. Like,
I mean,
go
especially
home. What?
if they were denying that. Well, okay, this is gonna be divisive because we're gonna get into this, I think, a little more at the end of this episode, but
Yeah,
especially if they were denying their religious freedoms, you know what I mean? Or their traditions, their heritage, their culture, their way of life, whatever kind of word you want to smack over it.
yeah.
Yeah, that's rotten. You know, that's rotten. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
No, it's fine. So the Soviet Union, they were not there to take over military or anything like that. They're trying to assist with the governments and getting them back on track. So they were considering retaliating against the military forces because of that. And then they convinced the president to remove the prime minister, Amin. So word got out to Amin, and then he had the president assassinated before he could get it removed.
Oh,
So
God.
he was like, "No, bitch,
No,
you
no.
gonna fucking get me? No, I'm gonna fucking get you
Yeah,
first,
I'll get you
okay?"
before you can get me. It's like that.
Yeah.
Right.
So that when I read that, like, I was literally like, I was like bug-eyed. I was like, "Holy shit!" So yeah, exactly. So Amin is the prime minister that assassinated the president. He then, of course, appointed himself president, prime minister, defense secretary, general secretary of their party. He was like, "I'm all of
Reagan,
it,
don't forget
bitch. I'm
that.
it. I'm it. I'm him, right?"
Look how
So
many hats
the
I wear.
Soviet leader, yeah, the Soviet leader, Leonid
No, if you want something
Brez,
right, you have to do it yourself. You have
yeah,
to.
exactly. He was
Tired,
like, "I can't trust any of
I'm
these
tired of hearing
motherfuckers."
that everybody talking these dictators and these political cult leaders. I'm tired because I'm telling you right now, when you want something done, you gotta do it.
For real. This guy was like, I'm just gonna do it all. Absolutely. So the Soviet leader decided the situation is fucked and ordered an invasion to overthrow Amin. They were successful, and then Karmal became president. So the US considered the Soviets' involvement a blatant attempt to overthrow a sovereign government. In response, they implemented an embargo on grain shipments to the Soviet Union, called for a boycott of the Moscow Olympics. They also decided it was against the nation's best interest to be openly involved in the war. And so the US funneled Soviet made weapons and money to the rebels through Pakistan.
Sure did.
Yeah, so aid to the Mujahideen was increased under the Reagan administration, and at its height, the American aid rebels reached $400 million per year.
Wowza. Wowza.
Yeah, so The war between the Soviets and the rebels continued for 10 years. The war took a toll on both sides. There were 15,000 Soviet casualties, minimum of 500,000 Afghan civilians killed.
Yeah,
Both
that's
sides
sad.
used brutal tactics. The Soviets bombed the countryside indiscriminately, destroying entire villages, and the Mujahideen that were captured were tortured and suffered slow, painful deaths. The Soviet forces withdrew in February of 1989, ending the Soviet-Afghan War. The civil wars between Afghan factions continued, though, so in between the different sections and stuff that still continued as it does still to this day. It is
Mhm.
speculated, though, that Osama bin Laden was part of the Afghan Arab Alliance and received training and aid during the period when the
Mhm.
US was sending aid to the Mujahideen.
Uh, wait, I know. Okay, so which I want everybody to I guess we should have said this at
This is
the top of it.
speculation, by the way.
It's all
Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
speculation. So
yeah,
there is because when I was doing research, the guy upstairs kept telling me, "Oh, we trained him, we trained him, we trained him." And I was like, "What are you talking about? Quit yelling at me about how
yeah,
I trained them." You know what I mean? Let me fight for myself. So, but anyways, I guess we should tell everyone. So we understand that there is a huge facet of the Taliban that is Osama bin Laden and is Al Qaeda. And we understand that
yeah,
it's connected and that there's a lot there. And in the future, we will be tackling that alone because just like how we talked about the Khmer Rouge with Hun Sen in the Cambodian episode, because the brevity of what happened as a result of these powers that be, and so we want to dedicate an episode to those out of respect for that story. And so
yeah,
we're going to touch on Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda because you can't have a Taliban episode without mentioning them. But we will go into much more detail about those speculative rumors and all those things in the future whenever we do an episode about Al Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. I just wanted to throw
yeah,
that off to the side just in case anybody was wondering.
yeah, for sure. So, of course, the US denies this speculation.
Hmm.
Although the leader of the Mujahideen, Hekmatyar, is a known ally of Osama bin Laden, and he did receive significant funding from the CIA. Hekmatyar was designated terrorist in 2003 and was accused of the U.S. by taking part in 9/11. So, yeah. Absolutely. So, I do have some more. So, from 1992 to 1994, a Soviet-backed regime collapsed and there was civil war. So the Soviet withdrew and the fall of the communist government, 1992. There was rival Mujahideen factions fought for Kabul, creating lawlessness, warlord rule, civilian suffering, chaotic environment helped the rise of the new movement that promised order. So the casualties, I have it estimated at approximately 1.5 million Afghans died before 1992.
Wow.
And
Wow.
then refugees by the late 1980s was 6 million Afghans became
Wow.
refugees. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, yeah, so it was a really dark period in Afghanistan during that for the civil war that followed the Soviet withdrawal. Afghanistan was in a really dark place. The civil war was raging across Afghanistan at the time, and there were so many different factions fighting to establish themselves in the seat of power, essentially. But no one was winning. It was just brutality across Afghanistan. But fighting among these was a man by the name of Muhammad Umar Mujahid, or Mullah Omar. And I'm going to be referring to him as Omar just to keep it simple for the rest of
Yeah.
this. Okay.
Okay.
Omar, I'll tell you about this guy. So Omar was fighting with the Mujahideen and he wasn't just getting anywhere, right? He was growing more and more impatient with the brutality he saw, the warlords and what he saw them doing. And so he took up fighting, like I said, to fight in the Civil War. Now, Omar grew up in a poor but large Pashtun or nomadic family. He was educated in religious studies primarily, and later he joined various military factions. So just like we said, he was upset, so he said, I'm going to go fight. This is a guy who will run out and fight at any time, he has that fighter's, I guess, spirit in him, if you will.
Mm,
So he joined various military factions, and at one point he lost an eye in an explosion, but he
damn.
also became an expert in using rocket-propelled grenades. Just a
Wow.
little fact about him. So information on this guy's childhood is scarce, but what we do know is that he stood strongly for Islamic fundamentalism and Pashtun nationalism, and he generally joined military factions that supported these views. So although he would run out to fight with various military factions along the way, he always sided with ones that shared those Islamic fundamentalism kind of views. So like I said, Omar was becoming increasingly upset of what he claims was facade or spreading corruption on earth, spreading mischief in a Muslim land, or moral corruption against Allah. And he was concerned that that was spreading across the land. Omar claimed early on that he had a dream that a woman told him, we need your help. You must rise. You must end the chaos. God will help you. So armed with his discontent over the civil wars raging across the land, Western influences, disrespecting Allah, and now a dream, he formed the Taliban. Now, the Taliban, it began with less than 50 armed students, like Amy had said earlier. Now, these students were recruited by Omar and by different his followers, right, from different religious schools. The Taliban were initially accepted by Afghans due to their promise to the Afghan people to stop the warlords that were currently wreaking chaos in the different regions. Many
Yeah.
of them raping and killing women and children. And they did initially do that, but in very extreme ways. Okay, so the Taliban did the promise they made to the people that they would get rid of the warlords. They absolutely did that. Like they made good on that promise. But these are the kinds of ways they did that, right? So Omar and 30 men took on a faction that had kidnapped 2 young girls and they were abusing them. They defeated them with only 16 rifles, and then they hung the warlord from a tank gun barrel. All right.
Nice.
In another instance, and they released the girls. Like they let the girls go back to their families after that. Omar and his group killed 2 officers that had taken a young boy to sodomize him and freed the boy. Tales of these feats spread, and people began requesting the Taliban to intercede in other disputes. So essentially, because they were they were really doing, like I said, they were making good on their promises, people were getting in touch with them and saying, hey, come and deal with this warlord in our area, or this guy over here, or this group over here that's running amok in this neighborhood. So they were requesting the Taliban to intercede in other disputes. But they rapidly, in doing this, basically in traveling through, in taking out these warlords, in providing this kind of vigilante justice for Afghans during this Civil War period, they rose very quickly to over 12,000 members.
Wow.
Yeah. So it wasn't a small group for very long. So now that he was armed with a significant movement, Omar and the Taliban captured Kandahar province. And in 1995, he had control of 12 of the 31 provinces of Afghanistan. So in 1 year, he was able to
Wow.
take over 12 of the 31 provinces. I find it hard to believe that he did that with like a small group of people. It must have grown quickly because of how fast they were able to gain power, really.
Yeah.
That's my speculation on it, I guess. And in 1996, his supporters gave him the title Commander of the Faithful. after he put on a cloak allegedly belonging to Muhammad that was locked in a chest and held in the shrine of the cloak in the city of Kandahar. It is said that whoever could retrieve the cloak would be the great leader of the Muslims. So that happened. Now, after taking Kandahar, Omar formed a Sunni Islamic theocracy headed by the Supreme Council, or Omar's closest devotees to Sharia law, also known as the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. And he would remain the supreme leader of Afghanistan, backed by the Taliban and enforcing Sharia law against all Afghanistan citizens until 2001. So Omar led the Taliban and was, even though there was a period where he did take off, and I'll get into that
Mhm.
later, but even while he was in hiding, he was still considered the leader of the Taliban and the supreme leader of Afghanistan. Yeah. All the way until 2001. Yeah. So that's a little back on Omar, Mullah Omar, and how he decided to start the Taliban, why he started it. I think he was, probably, seemed like a trigger happy kind of guy. You know, he jumped into a
Yeah.
lot of different wars willingly. He seems like he's strong in his convictions and beliefs because it was indoctrinated. He grew up in a religious military school. Like that's
Yeah.
sort of, it's heavy indoctrination in those schools. So, I mean, kind of a perfect storm, especially up against a landscape like Afghanistan that had the Civil War at the time. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and he made good on his promises. I mean, I kept trying to find things where it was like he not to say I agree with the way he did handle things or that ever agree with the way the Taliban handles anything. But all I'm saying is that, like, I kept looking for early on reasons to doubt them, in Afghanistan, like from like the Afghan people, like why wouldn't they at this point stop the Taliban or go against them? Why did they grow so rapidly? How did they get so big so quick? And it really was because they were taking care of people who the citizens of Afghanistan deemed worse than, and maybe that's because
Yeah.
they didn't really know what what a future would look like with the Taliban at that point. They didn't because it was so new. And maybe they wouldn't have agreed to support them early on if they had known what it would lead to. But
Yeah.
but it definitely was, I think, them swooping in at a time of desperation to a people that would have taken anything to relieve some of that stuff that was happening with the warlords.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, like I said, like the Taliban established itself pretty quick, took over Kandahar. By 1995, Omar and the Taliban had taken over 12 and established themselves in 12 of 31 of the provinces of Afghanistan. Now, 1996, things get a little bit sideways. Okay, so 1996, Osama bin Laden forms Al Qaeda, right? Isn't that the year that he did?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is where we're kind of there's not going to be a lot to talk about on that because, like I said, we're going to have an episode dedicated to Al Qaeda. But you should know during this time, Osama bin Laden, who did support the Taliban and was a member of the Taliban and did know Mullah
Mhm.
Omar or did know Omar well. And but he had ideas that he wanted to push that to Omar at the time, he did not agree with. He actually was quoted at one point as telling Osama bin Laden, "Don't bring Afghanistan into a Western war," is what he actually told Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden at this time, it didn't matter. I guess he was going to do his own thing. So he formed Al Qaeda as a result of that. He essentially formed Al Qaeda because what he wanted to do with the power that the Taliban had was too extreme for the Taliban, if that's telling you anything. So,
Yeah.
and then he formed Al Qaeda, and then there was the embassy bombing, and then, of course, eventually 9/11 happened. So we will have an episode that we were gonna get into all of the details of that and what those conversations kind of looked like and when he kind of defected, even though I won't say defected because even though the Taliban did provide him safe harbor when he was running from us, essentially. They provided
Yeah.
him safe harbor as a member of the Taliban. So yeah, we'll get into that in more detail, but really we want to focus on like after they established themselves, after Omar established themselves and the Taliban established themselves as kind of the prime majority rulers of the land, I would say, I guess. Then Sharia law happens.
So the word Sharia is in Arabic literally means the path or the way to follow, and it refers to Islamic law. The Quran, which Muslims believe is the word of God, and then the Hadith is the recorded sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad. So from those texts, the scholars over centuries developed a system of religious moral guidance that covers almost everything from how to pray and then fasting to rules about marriage, contracts, and then also crime. And um, so this is where it gets complicated. So Sharia isn't a single written law code. It's
Right.
interpreted differently in different Muslim majority countries and even among different Islamic schools of thought. Some nations like Saudi Arabia or Iran have built their legal systems almost entirely on Sharia principles, and while others blend it with civil or secular law. So under moderate interpretations, Sharia focuses on justice, charity, moral conduct, spiritual ethical code for daily life. Under extreme interpretations,
Right.
like the one enforced by the Taliban, Sharia becomes a rigid system of punishment, control, they impose harsh penalties such as public executions, amputations, flogging, severely restrict women's rights, banning education, work, public participation. So, in essence, the Taliban uses Sharia not just as law, but as a tool for power and fear, shaping
Mm.
it to justify their political control and silence, dissent. So, that's not how most of the world's Muslims live or interpret their faith. So, yeah, so when you hear Sharia law in the context of the Taliban, think less about religion itself, more about how they've weaponized it, into
Yeah.
political ideology. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of a lot of these restrictions they put and they put specifically on women.
Yeah, it's
That
sick.
Yeah. So I have during this time they restricted access to healthcare and education, so women were no longer allowed to go to school to get an
Yeah.
education. And then restrictions on access to healthcare. I do know that under their law, a man that is not a relative or that is married to a woman cannot see her unveiled, which means that unless she has a relative that is also a practicing physician, she cannot go to the doctor because a male doctor that is not known to her cannot look at her body.
Wow.
That's how that works. Yeah. Yeah. So no health care, essentially. I mean, no education. I know that they cut that out. No rights to personal effects. So basically no adornment. You can't like put makeup on. You can't wear jewelry. Like you can't, express yourself with anything, any accessory or color or anything like that. Um, there's also no free movement. You cannot go anywhere by yourself. You have to be accompanied by either a family member, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's like somebody you're related to, if not like a spouse. So you can't even go with I mean they don't have guy friends, that would
Oh,
be that's not
yeah,
even allowed. So if they
exactly.
were with a guy friend, they would probably get stoned to death. So
Yeah. You have no right of speech out in public. You cannot speak loud, and you must walk silently. That's also another thing.
no
Yeah.
stopping, no
So you better
skipping.
not stop about it. You better not. You better. You better
Fuck.
not. Yeah, so
Shit.
it's pretty brutal to be a woman in Afghanistan under those extreme, not, not all Sharia law, of course, but the extreme kind of Taliban-backed Sharia law. I mean, it's prison. It's imprisonment, essentially. That's what I would consider it anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So it looks like from 1996 is whenever they really start implementing a lot of the more like strict
Right.
Sharia laws. So they're starting like public punishments, like
Uh,
executions, amputations, floggings for crimes. And then they're also banning most forms of art and music, film,
that's an
photography.
yeah.
Yeah, they're destroying like TVs, musical instruments.
Mhm.
Women are being banned from working, attending school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then girls' education outlawed beyond the age of 8 in most areas. I apologize. I think you might have just literally just said that.
No, no, no. We can say it as many times as we need to because it's fucking sad.
It's awful.
It's fucking sad. Like, I mean, eh, it's just fucking sad. That's all I gotta say about that.
Yeah, and then I see that there is systematic persecution of
Yeah.
other, like, religions and ethnic minorities,
Yeah.
severe press censorship, so independent journalism is
Yeah.
gone. Yeah, and then, the Taliban continue fighting against the Northern Alliance, and I'm not sure if we mentioned the Northern Alliance before, but like
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
talked about, there was a lot of different, like, factions that were
Right. That's what you're talking about. Okay.
they're all colliding, and so in a time when the government is so unstable, like, there's just power grabs left and right.
Right.
And so they are at this point in time, they are fighting against the Northern Alliance, and that's an opposition coalition led by Ahmad Shah Massoud, controlling parts of northern Afghanistan. So Pakistan's inter-service intelligence, so it's ISI,
Yeah.
along with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, they are starting to recognize the Taliban as a government.
Hmm.
And then the Taliban capture Mazar Sharif in 1998, committing massacres of civilians, estimated 2,000 to 5,000 killed. Fuck, that is,
Yeah. So
oh my
basically,
gosh.
don't be deceived. Like just because Taliban took Kandahar in 1995 and then Osama bin Laden did his own thing with Al Qaeda, don't no no no. The Taliban was still actively trying to take over all of Afghanistan. Not they weren't going to be stopped at what 12 of the 31 provinces. They weren't going to be stopped by that number. Like they wanted complete rule, And I mean up until that point they'd gotten it in a year. I mean that's impressive. I don't know if that's the word for it, but it's
I
insane.
know, yeah.
It's insane to think about. But once they established themselves in that seat in Kandahar, they didn't stop there. They were still at war with all of these other factions, the Northern Alliance, and they were still because they were established in such a big province like Kandahar, then I think they really could start to unfold what they were fundamentally about, which was very extreme
Yeah,
and to the detriment of their citizens, especially their women.
yeah, absolutely. So it says here that during that period of time, the Taliban, they're starting to establish training camps all across the country where they are training their followers to fight, use different weapons. Yeah,
Yeah.
1998, following Al-Qaeda's bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya, Tanzania, the U.S. launches missile strikes on Afghan training camps. Yeah, so the Taliban refused to extradite bin Laden, deepening the tensions in international community. So, yeah, and then the next thing that I have written down is the September 11th that happens. So, Yeah, those are the main takeaways for that period in time, but
Yeah.
it's just getting crazy and crazier.
So the 9/11 attacks happened. The US, as we know, invaded Afghanistan along with our NATO allies. So we got with NATO, and I remember reading that Bush was basically, I say we as in like I was there, but Bush was basically like, hey, we're going to war with Afghanistan. And NATO was like, okay, well, do you want us to go with you? You know, we'll meet you there or whatever, however those talks go. And Bush was like, I don't care who meets us there. We're going anyway. Like, he kind of didn't care, from what I understand. So we go to Afghanistan, and Omar fled Kandahar after a bomb was dropped on his home. Now, this bomb killed his son and his stepfather/uncle. And I'm going to explain that. So his stepdad/uncle was home. He died in the bombing. And the reason that's his stepdad/uncle is because in this extreme Islamic fundamentalism, Sharia law that he believes and has grown up with, a woman cannot be unmarried. So if a woman's husband dies, she cannot be a widow. Someone in the family has to step up and marry her.
Oh.
So that's why his uncle is also his stepdaddy. Anyways, so it kills his son and his stepfather/uncle. I'm going to say that again. And he secured a hideout and relinquished his duties to his top followers. But before long, he began issuing orders from his hideout. So that's not to say he was not in charge. He just relinquished his like day-to-days. You know, he's like, hey, I'm going to go hide out. We're getting bombed. Osama bin Laden took off, you know, did what he did. And now US is pissed at us and they're coming to kick our ass. And I mean, like, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
And so he took off, you know, so he took off. But he was still, like I said, he was still considered the supreme leader. He was still considered the leader of the Taliban. So the Taliban activities still persisted through this time, even under US and NATO occupation. But to rebuild, in November of 2001, Omar ordered his troops and supporters to abandon Kabul and flee into the mountains. Omar had a meeting with his top commanders of the Taliban in these first few months following the US invasion, and they decided that fighting would lead to significant losses, and Omar was to be protected at all costs, as they considered him the Amir ul Momineen, or commander of the faithful. So Omar handed the Taliban leadership to his defense minister, Obaidullah, while he went into hiding. Okay. So once he fled, Omar was never seen publicly again. And he initially hid in the Zabul province, but he left and stayed underground in tunnels or mud houses in rural hamlets for the remainder of his life. He was protected by his followers and was still regarded as supreme leader of Afghanistan by his supporters until his death in 2013 of tuberculosis.
Damn.
Many of them would offer him food and clothing or safe passage while he was evading arrest. So he stayed mostly, like I said, in tunnels and hamlets towards the end, but all the while being protected by the people of these villages and by his followers. So he had a large network by all accounts because they kept him hidden, fed, housed, clothed, all that for years. So after he fled, like I said, he died in 2013 of tuberculosis. But after he fled, he was able to reorganize. And he launched an insurgency in 2003 against the government that had been installed by NATO and ISAF. Okay, so basically, he was still hitting them here and there from his
Yeah.
hiding spots in these hamlets, in these tunnels, in these mud houses, I guess they were called. But how he was able to give orders, he was able to reorganize by sending messages. And he actually launched an insurgency in 2003 against the government that had been installed by NATO and ISAF. Okay. Now, he had to send another message was found, and I thought this was interesting. They found a message that came out also in 2003 where Omar reinstated and reiterated that Obaidullah was the acting leader. Like, it's just really, I don't know if it was to the people of Afghanistan, or if it was to the Taliban, or if it was to his friend, but they did find the tape where he had issued that in his latest in 3, because there was a lot of speculation about where Omar was at the time and if he was even still alive. Like, the US for a while was saying they had killed him in like some kind of air attack. But then, these tapes surfaced that he had obviously sent out after the US had said that they were able to kill him or got him or something. No, he died of tuberculosis in 2013. We never killed him by all evidence. He sent I said, it was a little strange. He sent a message reiterating that Obaidullah is the acting leader in 2003. He also sent another one in 2007. But later on in 2007, like later that year after he sent that message,
Mhm.
Obaidullah was captured by Pakistani security forces and released in exchange for 200 soldiers. But then he was recaptured in 2008. So he wasn't let go for very long before he got picked up again. And
Yeah.
then, so Omar made numerous statements in the years in exile, like during his time of exile. He said that the Afghan war would continue, that the Taliban were hunting American soldiers like pigs, and that foreign forces will be driven out. He also made statements ordering more suicide bombers at one point. So, from 2004 to 2005, the Taliban burned schools and clinics, kidnapped and assassinated government officials and village elders. And behind the scenes, they were planning a grand offensive that would take many years. They were able to plan their attacks out by taking over southern provinces first. So that's how they initially started to rebuild, was doing it by taking over those southern provinces first. The
Yeah.
madrasas were set up as a network to recruit young members into jihad mindsets to serve the Taliban as suicide bombers. So this was still happening in the madrasas. The Taliban continued rebuilding and they continued fighting back the troops. And with the most insurgent attacks actually peaked in 2010, was the most insurgent attacks from the Taliban on Afghanistan soil. In 2011, bin Laden was killed, but the battle that followed in Kandahar would prove to be the worst since the fall of the Taliban, resulting in 40 deaths and many more wounded, proving that the Taliban was gaining its momentum back and was not relenting. So the same year that they killed Osama bin Laden, they retaliated in a big way. So in 2011, President Obama announced that 10,000 troops would be withdrawn by the end of the year. Canada and NATO countries followed, even though Taliban attacks continued in 2013, and there was 28,000 were reported Taliban attacks. Okay, between 2014 and 2015, more troops withdrew, and the governance was given to the Afghans. Taliban insurgency continued to grow. So as we're pulling out, as NATO's pulling out, as Canada's pulling out, Taliban's growing. It wasn't until 2015 that the Taliban officially released a statement claiming that Omar had died in 2013. They had kept this a secret for fear it would weaken an already fractured Taliban. By this time, the Taliban was being led by Akhtar Mamsadler, as Abdullah had died in 2010, and nobody had known that either. So from 2015 to, this is just so much information just doesn't come out at the time. Like, this is if
Yeah.
anything. So from 2015 to 2020, Taliban attacks continued and forces on the ground continued to fight back. In 2017, Trump ordered drone attacks to destroy poppy fields, which cut off the Taliban funding source. But at this point, the Taliban occupied nearly 70% of Afghanistan. In 2017, the Taliban had already taken back 70%. So, like, this, this has been happening, climbing back up for a while. In 2018, Trump attempted peace talks with the Taliban, and again in 2019 and in 2020, in spite of the continuing Taliban terror on Afghans. Trump signed a peace deal with them, agreeing to withdraw troops within 14 months. And by 2021, the Taliban had regained control of the whole of Afghanistan, establishing itself as government and enforcing its strict fundamentalist Islamic ideals on the entire country. So yeah, that's that. And the last troops came out under Biden during the Biden administration.
Yeah, that was in 2021. Yeah.
But make no mistake, it wasn't like it wasn't like the Taliban didn't have control of over 80 something percent of the country by then. You know what I mean? Like
I
this
know. Yeah.
there wasn't we weren't an established force anymore there. They were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that
From
brings
what
us
from
to
what I
2021 and yeah, that's quite all I got.
Yeah, the most recent information that I have written down, so still to this day, a lot of countries are not recognizing the Taliban as an actual like state, like a government.
Right.
And
No,
so there
no.
are there are some countries that will
Yeah.
deal with them, but a lot of other like Western states, they don't want anything to do with them. They're not doing shit with them. So
Because of the way their treatment of women.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And, all of the humanitarian crisis that's
Yeah.
happening in the country all the time. What I have is for 2025 is shit going down with Pakistan. Like they're on the verge of an all-out war. So in the fall of 2025, so this was like literally like last month, tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan's Taliban government hit one of their worst points since the Taliban took power in 2021. It started with cross-border attacks, and then Pakistan accused Taliban fighters of harboring and supporting militants behind the assaults on its territory. But in response, Pakistan launched airstrikes against Afghanistan, claiming to target insurgent camps, but Afghan officials said those strikes killed more than a dozen civilians. The situation spiraled fast. Firefights, troop buildups, open threats of war. Pakistan's defense minister even warned that if peace talks failed, the two countries could face open conflict. So that was this month. So
Wow.
after days of fighting and mounting casualties, both sides agreed to a temporary ceasefire in mid-October, but it's fragile, really.
Yeah.
So what makes this showdown significant is that it marks a shift for the Taliban from a militant insurgency to a governing power now facing international disputes, border diplomacy, and the realities of running a state. In other words, the Taliban aren't just fighting internal enemies anymore, they're negotiating, threatening, being threatened on the global stage. And that evolution says a lot about how their rule is taking shape and how unstable the region remains, really.
Yeah, it does. It does. Wow,
Yeah,
wow, wow.
I know. It's fucked.
It is. It is fucked. It's so fucked. Can we breathe about that?
Yeah.
It's fucked. Yeah, I feel really bad. I feel so bad for
It's
I
been it's been an like an ongoing just shit show
yeah.
for fucking ever.
Mhm. I know, I know. For I mean, for as long as I can remember now, reading some of the stories, some of the stories of of just from women, of women in their
Yeah.
70s, 80s being beaten in the streets and, little girls just all of a sudden not being able to go to school one day ever again. And that's a wrap. It's heartbreaking. It's so heartbreaking. And it's heartbreaking enough when you don't add in the genocide and the murders and the decapitations and all the other stuff that comes with it. Like that's horrific. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's heartbreaking from even the genesis of it, like out the gate. It's awful, and it's heartbreaking. So
Yeah, and their form of law is basically like somebody says something about somebody, and then there's a group of Taliban members that will question this person.
yeah,
And if they think that this person is guilty, then that person's guilty. It's just that. No one's allowed to represent that person. They don't have a lawyer. They don't have police officers. They don't have
yeah.
fire. Like it's. I mean, they don't have a lot of what the things that we have here,
Mm-hmm. No, I know.
and yeah, it's insane.
Sad.
I mean, it's hard saying stuff like this about another country, another culture where, they might some of them might be perfectly happy with the state that they're in. Who knows? But just
Yeah,
one thing
we're
that really has
independent Americans. Like we have a lot of freedoms. I understand that there in a lot of ways there's some freedoms we don't have. I get that. But like when compared
yeah,
to Afghanistan current, we have so many more as women, you know what I mean? And it's just I want to give them all the same freedoms I have if they wanted them.
yeah, absolutely. One thing that really stands out in my mind, which for this episode, I didn't do a lot of like video research because I knew how hard that was going to be. But one thing that really stood out was the planes. I'm going to start crying. The planes that were leaving in 2021
Mhm. Oh yeah.
and the people climbing the planes
Yeah.
and climbing
'Cause they
into
want it out.
any possible way to get out. It was horrific. It was horrific seeing these people. They're holding on to the outside of a plane,
Mhm.
and then there's other people climbing on top of you
Mhm.
just in an attempt to get
Yeah.
out of the country.
Mhm. Yeah, so, like, people think about that whenever you say mean things about refugees or immigrants, because maybe they're leaving Afghanistan, and maybe it's because
Absolutely.
they don't wanna be there because
I know. And we have Ukrainian refugees here. We have refugees from all over. And
"Bring 'em on, let them come in."
yeah,
Man, that Statue of Liberty represents something.
it does.
It sure does, and if you
And
wanna
not
know what
just
it is,
that.
let me tell you, go do your research, Google it.
And not just that, like so many of the people who have a hard time with refugees are supposedly Christian.
I
And what
know.
is the one fucking thing that that book tells you to do? The one fucking thing it tells you to do is love thy fucking neighbor. Not if they're not from somewhere else, not
I
if,
know.
you know, like help them, feed them.
Yes, please. These people,
That's
like,
fucking it. Like,
the thing is
my
the
God.
culture, like, when I don't know about you, but when I was, like, reading about the Taliban, you can't help but, like, also read about Afghanistan and Afghan culture and what heritage they have and how beautiful their music is and their food. Oh my God,
I
their food. And like there is so much beauty in their culture. And like I'm gonna get sad about this. And it's being suppressed. And so if their beautiful culture is being suppressed in their own country and they want to come here and share that beautiful culture with us, please, come on, bring it, bring it. You
yeah,
know what I mean? And yeah, we'll trade you some rights for that. That's fine. It's fair.
yeah.
I don't understand how anybody could like, I don't know,
And
just
they probably don't even give a fuck about the health insurance. They don't give a fuck about the taxes. They don't give a fuck about the benefits. They just don't want to get fucking shot.
yeah, exactly. Or get
They don't
stoned to
want
death.
they
Or
want to go to school.
yeah, or like get dragged out from their house because a man that wasn't related to them saw their shoulder.
Yeah.
So they get pulled out in the street and beat to death because of it. Like, I mean, how's okay, I'm not gonna bitch at Americans all the time. But, like, I definitely feel like there's a side of Afghanistan that gets, um, I don't know, suppressed because of how our news is reported, but also because of how the information is being, you know,
Yeah,
how it's being controlled over there, both of those things. But, like, if you really dig deep, like, you find, like, a lot of really rich, awesome culture there and, like, a lot of beauty within that country, you know?
yeah,
And it's just
absolutely.
sad. It's sad what's happening over there. That's all. Yeah, this is a closeout kind of just for the whole series, really, and, this episode specifically. So, whether you are currently under a strict authoritarian rule or facing the prospect of one, your struggle for dignity is seen by the world. The violence and chaos that these political cults can incite leaves scars, both internally and externally, to its land and its people. But survivors are built to endure for a reason. A girl in Afghanistan that had her school burned down by the Taliban is a woman that secretly teaches other young girls how to navigate their education under Sharia law by the hundreds. The Afghan boy who watched the Taliban murder his family now serves as a resistance fighter against them. A Cambodian citizen that lost the only home they ever knew to Hun Sen's greed studies law for the sole purpose of fighting for other poor Cambodian villagers and farmers. Or the YouTuber that leaks news from under Hun Sen's nose about what is actually happening in Cambodia. How about the trans woman in Brazil who stepped out to protest Bolsonaro and now gets to write a blog about her rights and her experience and shares it with others and emails Bolsonaro a copy of each new post happily? The
Mm,
little girl in Brazil whose family had to file bankruptcy on their small diner because of Lula's financial misdeeds now runs a nonprofit and teaches others the complexities of finances in the business world. Or two American women who are watching their country being ran by a lunatic and decide to educate themselves so they could start a web series and bring people together during a time of complete divisiveness. Attempts by the powers that be to break the social fabric of our lives are combated by people everywhere, every day, weaving it back together, one hopeful or caring act at a time. So educate yourself and try to educate others that are willing and ready to learn. Education is a weapon. And be kind to others. Kindness and peace are just as effective political tools as hate and violence. Endure in hopes that others can pull from that strength. Endure so that one day we won't have to, and endure so that our children can grow up in a world that doesn't try to make survivors out of them. That's it.
yeah,
Yeah. So, it's tough, but tough endures for a reason.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So this ends our series on political cults.
Okay, yeah, we hope you enjoyed it. We really do.
Yeah,
And if you missed
I
any
really
of
do.
the episodes, you can find them all on thisjutsin and itsgrim.com, along with our resource material and photos and transcripts and all the other
Yep,
stuff.
all the things,
All
all
the
the
things.
buttons to click.
If you ever
So
see something you need to know about this, just go to our website. It's always
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I hope you will join us next week when we meet on Twitch to talk
Yeah.
about this series closing and we can talk about what's next.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we're meeting at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Twitch, just so you guys know, next Thursday. Exciting.
Me too.
Okay, well, until next time, guys.
All right. Bye.